Well, hey, you know what? Today, if you've ever pondered about social media, the pros, the cons, we have someone who's going to help us to unpack that a bit. She's written an amazing new book called Killing Comparisons. Would you welcome today Nona Jones to our program? Nona, thank you for coming on
Thank
and
you
being
for
with
having
us.
me.
And
I'm so honored.
yeah, and it's easy to brag about you and talk about you, pastor, author, and teacher, but you're also an executive at one of the largest or the largest social media platforms in the world. So we're just going to leave it at that. And I'm sure you have more people liking you than I have liking me, with whatever that means.
I hope.
You know, that title to your book is so intriguing. And as we begin to think about killing comparisons, I have seen the damage that has happened with so many people as they start to compare themselves. Even, young people that are my age. And that's a little oxymoron, but they're going away on a holiday. Well, look what I'm doing. And all of a sudden you start to feel guilty if you haven't done that as well. So talk to me from your perspective. Why did you write the book? I can guess a few reasons, but I want to hear it from you.
Well, I think first of all, you kind of hit the nail on the head. I wrote the book really because I probably would be considered one of the least likely people to struggle with comparison and insecurity. I mean, I've been so blessed, so fortunate in my career, in my life, married to a wonderful man, just beautiful children. And, I really thank God for his favor on my life. And yet, early in the pandemic when things were shutting down, I remember I had a full year of speaking engagements that year, and they all got canceled because the events got canceled. And I went on Instagram one morning just to respond to comments from people, but I caught a glimpse of my news feed, and a friend of mine made a post. She said that she was excited because she was going to be speaking at this huge virtual women's conference, and I saw her post and I remember thinking, oh, that's cool. Well, I scrolled down a little more, and another friend announced that she was speaking at the conference. And I was like, okay. And I scrolled down a little more, and there were another friend and another friend. And it got to the point where I knew all of the speakers and I knew the host. And seeing all those posts left me with the question, why wasn't I invited? Like, why wasn't I good enough? Why didn't I measure up? And it kind of kicked off this spiral within me that led me to have to do some self work to figure out where was this coming from.
Wow. So Nona, that's interesting, and that's something that's not often talked about. You hear these big people who are often given public platforms like yourselves, and we never say, "Oh, I'm sure they go through insecurity. They're larger than life. They're on the screen, right?" So,
Yeah.
just talk to us. If insecurity can come to anybody like that, what are some things we need to watch out for, and how do we process insecurity?
Well, I think it's important to know, first of all, what is insecurity? I want to start there because sometimes we think that insecurity is the result of low self esteem. And so, what we do in response is we memorize scriptures about being fearfully and wonderfully made and, being a royal priesthood. And we memorize positive affirmations about how we're good and we're smart and we're kind. And we do all these things. But insecurity is actually not about self esteem. Insecurity is a question of what is your identity secured to?
Mm.
And if your identity is secured to an insecure foundation, that's what leads to insecurity, which of course raises the question, well, what's an insecure foundation? An insecure foundation is really anything that is subject to other people's approval. It could be your academic credentials. Some of us have secured our identity to our financial status, our physical appearance. And so when those things don't get the approval of other people, we feel insecure. And that's what leads us to this kind of performative existence where we're posting, look at me, look at, how I'm looking in this dress, or look at this new car I bought, because it's coming out of a place of an insecure identity. And the first step to getting free from toxic comparison is figuring out what is the insecure foundation that your identity is secured to.
Well, so let me ask you another question, because so often we hear, and we're starting to see that, in my opinion, we're starting to see that on social media, and awareness that, it's unhealthy to be comparing ourselves to other people. Whatever it is in life, work at it, but don't worry about how other people feel. So we see that, the idea that, hey, we shouldn't get our approval from other people. At the same time, social media is full of that, comparisons and all this sort of thing. So how do we reconcile? Some people say, yeah, don't worry about other people. At the same time, social media, a large part of it is comparing yourself to other people. How do we reconcile that?
I love this question because, working in this space, I know that social media gets blamed all of the time for causing insecurity. And while I do believe that social media exposes insecurity, I don't believe it's the source. And the reason I don't believe it's the source is because two people can see the exact same post and have two different reactions. Let's say somebody makes a post about, their trip to Turks and Caicos, right? And they went on this amazing vacation. One person will see that post and say, wow, I want to go there. Let me see what I can do to save money so I can go to Turks and Caicos too. Another person will see that post and say, why do they get to go to Turks and Caicos? Like, that's not fair. And so it really is a question of the posture of our heart. And one of the concepts that I discuss in Killing Comparison is I talk about how comparison can actually lead to one of two outcomes. It can either lead to inspiration, which is actually the physiological process of inhaling air into your lungs. That's what it's called, is inspiration. You feel alive, invigorated. Or it can lead to expiration. And that's the physiological process of exhaling air out of your lungs. So much so that when you take your last breath, it's called your expiration date. And so whether you see somebody's success as your failure is really a question of the condition of your heart. So I don't blame social media for the condition of our heart. I really think it's an opportunity for us to ask, man, what's going on inside of me?
As you're talking about that, Nona, I was thinking back to before social media came around, and unfortunately, I can still remember those days. But we were still guilty of comparing ourselves. And as a pastor, I would compare myself to other pastors. How successful were they? And I would never want to admit it. But, pride was a huge thing as we battled it. And I think that if, as you have rightly said, that what social media has done is put the whole comparison game on steroids. It's just heightened it. And it's exposing something that we don't want to admit that is there, but it's almost like we're driven. Would you agree? It's almost like a caffeine fixation. I've got to have more. I've got to have more, some kind of an addiction. How have you processed that?
Yeah, I think honestly, the root of what leads to comparison has a lot to do with the words that are spoken over us. And in the book of Proverbs, it tells us that life and death are in the power of the tongue. And that word power is the Hebrew word yad, which means hand. And so when you think about it, the words that we speak actually shape, they mold, they create, they have the power to create. And so some of us are struggling with insecurity because there have been words spoken over us that have fractured our identity. They fractured our understanding of our worth and our value. I think about the example you just gave as a pastor. Look, my husband is a pastor, and my goodness, if there was ever a place where comparison is running rampant, it's in pastors. Why? Because that success is what gets glorified, right? Like the big mega church, that's the standard for success. Well, if your church is relatively small, you may feel like a failure, not because you really are, but because the standard of success has been set out of your reach. And so I think one of the steps that we have to take in order to deal with this compulsion to compare is we have to stop using each other as the measuring stick for our worthiness. And we have to start to really get an intimate relationship with God so that we can be like, Lord, okay, I know that the word says before I was formed in the womb that you knew me, which means I had purpose on my life before sperm met the egg. Help me to understand just how worthy I am. So I stop seeing the church across the street as my competition. Because the truth is, you're not in competition with anybody else on this earth. Because when God decided that you were necessary for creation, he gave you a unique purpose that nobody else can fill.
Nona, those are powerful words, and we're going to come back and pick it up after a short break. You're watching The Perspective today, and our guest is Nona Jones. We'll be right back.